And good afternoon. I hope this video finds you well. As we consider where we are in Matthew 6, looking at this prayer that Jesus guides us in, it's always a great opportunity to reflect on just where we are in terms of the kingdom of heaven, particularly as we engage with the world. And I have no idea, where you are in terms of just the concern or anxiety or anger or frustration that you're experiencing. But to realize that as Jesus centers us in this prayer to focus on God's kingdom coming and his will being done, as we content ourselves and occupy ourselves with that, I think we'll find the commensurate peace and joy that should be part of our lives as believers. And knowing there's a God who is in heaven, who is in control of all things, and yet deeply cares about us. And that is truly reflected in this prayer. As we move on from, or did move on Tuesday, going from that aspect of the prayer that focuses on God, and then talking about us and how just the reality of what Jesus is saying here, and God being aware of our physical needs, aware of our human needs, and his willingness to hear our requests around that. As it says here, "Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread." And when you think about the nature of our finiteness, the nature of our need, the fact that God has created us in that way, I think as Jesus welcomes us to present these requests to God, it really goes beyond food. Like God recognizes that we would have a need for warmth, we'd have a need for drink, for fluid, need for rest, all the things that our bodies call for in just the way God created us. I think when Jesus talks about this prayer, it really is giving us permission to go to God for all the physical needs we might have. But I think something we have to be aware of when we think about this in America, when you think about just how basic it is, give us this day our daily bread, and how minimalist that is. When we think about what we're normally occupied with as Americans, more often than not, we're really talking about our greeds more we are talking about our needs. We're talking more about the future than we are about the present. We can't miss the fact that Jesus says, give us this today, our daily bread. That the occupation we have in terms of our lives is just the daily sustenance that God gives us. We become very good at, storing food and refrigerating food and finding ways to preserve it. And here Jesus is saying, there's a dependence that I would desire for you to have each and every day around what you receive. And I think there's a way for us to do that effectively in our modern society where we're thanking God for our food, where we're praying over our food, asking him to sanctify it, but also just recognizing him as a provider of it. As we saw on Tuesday, really every aspect of food comes from the ground, comes from the sea, comes from what God has established in creation. And so we are ultimately dependent on him. I really like what the book of Proverbs says in regards to this. And I think there's a good lesson for us in terms of the lessons that come to us from this verse in terms of just the nature of how we manage needs and wants here in America. That when we think about daily bread, we're more often occupied with either the future and the worry and concern that comes from that, or the comparison that we do towards people, or the covetousness that's in our heart, the greed that we might have. And so I like what the book of Proverbs says here in Proverbs 30, verses 8 and 9. It says, "Keep falsehood and lies far from me." That's important in our day and age. "Give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread. Otherwise I may have too much and disown you, and say, 'Who is the Lord?' Or I may become poor and steal, and so dishonor the name of my God." And how important these verses are to us here in America. I just like what it says. Just give me my daily bread. Not poverty or riches. Otherwise, I may have too much and disown you, or I may become poor and steal. And I think we very much can understand those dynamics operating in our life. The danger of prosperity, the danger of good times, the danger of being able to make it on our own, is we distance ourselves from God, that we don't feel like we're dependent, even though we are. we are able to handle problems and difficulties and challenges. We think about a world out there that dismisses God and seeks to chart a course, based in their own power, based in their own provision, based in their own ability. And it really is a reflection of this. Like, I'm able to deal with this, so why do I need God? Who is the Lord? And yet, on the other hand, we can understand the temptation. If we were truly desperate, if we truly didn't have food on the table, there was no food in the fridge, what would we do? Maybe, in American society, we've done such a good job even of managing that, of taking care of the poor. Maybe that it wouldn't be so much we would steal, but we might, go, apply for food stamps or get some sort of governmental subsidy, which, when it's appropriate. But, we just understand that the balance that's here, and how, if we have too much, then we don't, it's not reinforced in our lives the dependence that we have on God. If we have too little, then we might resort to other kinds of evil. And, again, when you think about just the basic necessity of daily bread, when you think about just the daily provision that Jesus is asking us to be oriented to, when he says, later on in Matthew chapter 6, rather, that seek first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added to you. That, don't worry about tomorrow. Don't worry about, food or clothing. Jesus reinforces just the importance of seeking God's kingdom. In the same way that God takes care of the sparrows, he takes care of the lilies of the field, how much are we entrusting ourselves to God? That even as we are taking advantage of the blessings that we have here in America, where we're doing the things that we believe God would have us do in terms of doing work, earning income, saving, being generous, so on and so forth. How much are we just recognizing that daily dependence and not letting whatever prosperity we have draw us away from God? But I think another thing that becomes substantive in this is the covetousness that we have. It is the greed that we have. We have to understand in this sin nature that we've talked about, that we talked about this past Sunday, that sin nature is insatiable. That once you give it a little, it wants more. What is that Harrison Ford line in Air Force One? What happens when you give a mouse a cookie? He wants a cup of milk. Well, in the same way, our sin nature, it fosters this covetousness. It forces this greed. It forces, okay, I have this, but I want more. What was it? Howard Hughes, was it him that was asked, what's the hardest amount of money to make? And he said, enough. And so, once we have a great amount, we still want more. And that, again, that's a function of our pride. That's a function of our selfishness. It's the greed that is part of that nature. And hopefully you see how that's a substantive thing to talk about as Jesus is talking about God. Give us today our daily bread. It's the basic necessities that we go to God for. It's the basic necessities that we really need. God does even set a pattern in Scripture of the blessing that he gives to people. Even though Jesus is calling us to pray for our daily bread, Jesus does bless beyond that. It's not like God would ask us to take a vow of poverty. Because that's just not a model that we see consistently in Scripture as far as what God calls his people to. In fact, you look at the Old Testament and it's just the opposite. Now, I do agree that the life of Jesus was very different from the life of Abraham or those patriarchs, Moses even, but David, you know what I'm saying. Paul's life, certainly wasn't representative of that physical wealth, and prosperity, that we might see in the Old Testament. But, we just have to make sure that we keep that in balance, that we, recognize God working in and through it on our behalf. But we need to watch out for that greed. We need to watch out for that covetousness. I think one of the greatest detriments in our society today is this comparison that we're encouraged to live in. I think the whole the whole marketing advertising industry is based in greed and covetousness. It's based in, yeah, you may have, but you need the new thing, or you need the other thing. You need what this person has. If you're going to be cool, if you're going to, have the status, then you have to drive this kind of car. You need to drive these kind of clothes. You got to have that kind of house. You got to live here. You got to live there. And, just the comparison that we're encouraged to live in, it really defies what Jesus is expressing here. Just that orientation to, something, if I have my daily provisions, then that's enough. And I need to learn that discipline, that benefit of contentment. I think if there's anything that we don't have, if there's anything that would be helpful to us in terms of having peace, having joy, is just being content, just being satisfied. Letting God do what He can do in terms of the provisions He makes, the blessings that He gives. How He guides us in paths of righteousness. For His name's sake, and that's towards a certain maybe level of education we might receive, a certain job we might have, certain skill set that God has gifted us with, and intelligence that we have. And, we talked about this before in these videos, but I think it's such an important concept, and particularly I think it's substantive when we think about what Jesus is asking to pray for here, is we just learn that aspect of contentment. And then, being satisfied in who God has made us, where He has placed us, what gifts and abilities we have, what place we have in our society, in our income level, in the house we have, in the car, all the things that we might possess, because like that there's so many bad things that come from wanting more, needing, particularly needing more, and we just had to be careful of that, because God does know our needs. He's willing to satisfy them. He's willing to provide for us. But there's just something so simplistic. There's something so basic, so fundamental in Jesus just saying, give us this day our daily bread. Doesn't it just almost breed a humility? Doesn't it just breed a simplicity of life in terms of, what are we striving for? What is it that we're seeking? And even to the extent of how are we being in the context of the things we have, I think it's one thing to say, okay, God has blessed me, and I'm content with that, and that's a good place to be. I think that's where we can be today. Gives our daily bread. That I'm not worried about what I have. I'm not clinging to what I have. I'm not possessive of what I have. If God took it all away, I'd be fine. I'm not, letting fear and anxiety control me in regards to things that I have. See, I think that is part of, say, give us our daily bread. That God, I'm oriented to you. I'm oriented to your sustenance. I'm oriented to what you provide. And if what I have is what you've provided, if what I have is what I'm blessed with, then God, I'm not in the context of that, I'm not being covetous. In the context of that, I'm not being greedy. In the context of that, I'm not clinging to things. I'm not letting possessions possess me. I possess them, and I have a very loose hand in regards to I'm being generous. I'm following God's dictates about how He asks me to control money and do things with money in terms of giving and both to God and to other people, and so I think that's all part of just the orientation that Jesus calls us to. Again, as He moves from the spiritual, He moves from the kingdom of heaven coming and the God's will be done, us be doing it too, and God being in heaven. But give us this day our daily bread, and what does that say beyond just the physical provision, beyond just the basic nature of the prayer? What does it speak about our lives and the kind of people we are to be? and the peace that's commensurate with us praying the prayer and God being faithful in it. The contentment that is commensurate with us praying the prayer and God answering it. You know, what we don't do in terms of fear and worry, what we don't do in terms of covetousness, what we don't do in terms of greed, because we're praying the prayer and God is answering in the way that he sees fit. And so hopefully that makes sense to you. And next time we will move on in terms of just looking at the other human needs. You know, as I said before, and I'll say probably again, this prayer is genius in terms of just what it reveals about God's heart, what it reveals about what God is directing us toward, what he recognizes we need. And it's just interesting the categories we find here that express that. Well, I hope you're having a good day. And again, this video finds you well. God bless you in your day today.